Hello, this is Vincent, and welcome to Dogma Discussions, the place to discuss all kinds of dogma and the harm that it can cause. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share it, leave me a comment, and all that. Let's get started. The story I have to share with you this time is the dogma of God's plan. Did you ever hear the dogma that God has a plan for your life? For those for whom everything falls into place, it sure seems like it. Yet, for many Christians, opportunities pass by unpursued. Why? Because they've been trained to wait for a sign of God's plan. It's sad to see. They wait and wait and wait. Then, when an opportunity opens up, they'll pray, asking if it's God's will, often waiting for too long. And if they can't free their minds, the effect of the dogma is either a sense of abandonment, confusion, or defeat. As a result, they lead unsatisfying and unhappy lives. So, who is most susceptible to this dogma? In my experience, it's either those who suffer from trauma, or a feeling of unworthiness, or a victim mindset. In the book of Jeremiah, God says that He has a plan for His followers that will prosper and not harm them, a plan that will give them hope and a future. Consider the comfort of that thought, especially for those who have experienced trauma. My own mother, for example, she had grown up very poor from a divorced family in the rural southern United States, in a time when the practice was to shun children in this situation, not to help them. The horrors she experienced, I can only imagine. Yet, she found solace in the words of traveling ministers who would visit those destitute areas and hold tent revivals. That's where she first heard God's promise from the book of Jeremiah. Throughout her life, she searched and prayed fervently, trying to understand God's plan. Eventually, possibly brought on by the chronic stress, which had continued unabated from her childhood, her health started to falter, and for decades she suffered a series of physical ailments. Yet she kept waiting for a plan, seeking to understand how it could be God's will for her to suffer so much. Finally, at the end of her life, her faith began to wane, and she questioned, like Jesus on the cross, why God had forsaken her. Unfortunately, she never realized that the obstacle to happiness, to healing, was in her own mind. A friend of mine named Sally had also undergone terrible childhood abuse. She found God through a foster parent. At times, when Sally struggled to understand why a loving, all-powerful God would have her experience such pain and suffering, her foster mother would pray with her and quote from Romans that, for those who love God, all things work together for good. And she would urge Sally to follow the scripture. And Sally did. She married, had children, went to church, and thought that she was following God's plan. Excited about how her life was turning out over time, she became even more fervent and pushed her husband to be so as well. He tried, but didn't feel it. As a result, she continuously castigated him for his lack of devotion. Eventually, unable to endure her fanaticism any longer, he left. Sally was devastated, for she believed in the dogma of God's plan and felt she was following it. So, why did it all fall apart? How could being so devout be wrong? Sally didn't understand. Thus, she began to doubt a divine plan, which caused her to feel guilty and bewildered. For those who feel, for whatever reason, unworthy, the dogma is equally harmful. My friend Jimmy was like this because his parents were hypercritical of everything he did, using religion as a battering ram, which caused him to doubt himself. When, as a teenager, he sought advice from his family pastor, he was read another quote from Jeremiah in which God says that before you were formed in the womb, He knew you. The message: trust God. When Jimmy graduated high school and wasn't sure if he should try college, he asked his parents, desperately searching their faces for a glimmer of confidence that he could succeed. But they gave no advice, except that from the book of James, that if you need wisdom, ask God and He will give it. Jimmy tried praying constantly, but no help came. Finally, languishing in a low-level job and not seeing any plan forthcoming, he entered college and finally did succeed. Jimmy just had to find his own sense of self-worth. Yet, what about those who don't? Like my friend Fred. You see, Fred was raised from infancy in a church that trained his mind to believe, have faith, and wait for God's timing. Consider this command from Proverbs. It goes like this: trust God with all your heart. Don't rely on your own understanding. Completely submit, and God's plan will be revealed. And what's wrong with that? Well, telling someone to turn off his critical thinking skills is akin to making that person a victim. Fred, being raised in this dogma, dutifully followed those commands, and it didn't turn out very well for him. Problem: this mindset caused Fred to consistently trust those who would take advantage of him. How? By being raised to be submissive, to not rely on reason. Rather, trust God. That meant for Fred that God would protect him, especially from harmful people. And did God protect him? Nope. In fact, the avoidance of critical thought left Fred gullible and unable to understand why people kept mistreating him. In fact, he saw these as isolated incidents, not as a result of his mindset. Thus, he would turn the other cheek, try to figure out God's lesson for himself, and keep the faith. And then he met Marilyn. She was everything Fred was not. Decisive, ambitious, dominant, and controlling, and he fell under her power instantly. When they began to date, he told her everything he wanted in a girlfriend. As a result, she knew exactly how to play him, and play him she did. From time to time, Fred would become frustrated at the treatment he was receiving at her hands, and he would confide in me. The last time was 2 weeks before his marriage. His bride-to-be is at her parents', making wedding preparations. Fred comes by my place after getting off work from his second job. We sit on the front porch drinking beer. Let me take you to that moment. 2 jobs, Fred. Why? Oh, he says, looking down. Marilyn wants such a big wedding. It's the only way to pay for it. Is she working 2 jobs? No, he says, not even one. I pause for a moment, not sure where to go with this conversation. It is about 9 p.m. on a warm, mid-August evening. I listen to the cicadas. Moths flit against the light fixture above my head. I look at trees and grass in front of my apartment, hoping for inspiration from nature. Fred, are you sure that you want to go through with this? He looks at me, startled. With the wedding? Uh-huh, I answer, nodding. Vincent, I appreciate you listening, but what, Fred? His eyes take on the look of a man pleading for his life, defending his actions in court. But we've already hired the caterer, photographer, paid for the dresses, the tuxes for the groomsmen, the hall for the dance, the band, Fred, who cares? He drops his head in resignation. I can't. Fred, if you don't end this now, this could be the rest of your life. This time when he looks at me, his eyes have tears. Vincent, I know that you're not a believer, but I have faith that somehow this is all part of God's plan. And with that, he sits his bottle down, gives me a hug, and leaves. He suffered through a horrible marriage for years after that, enduring Marilyn's cheating and her constant criticism before she left him for another man. Why did he put up with it? Because he was raised to be a victim by being told not to trust himself or his own understanding, to turn the other cheek, and it almost destroyed him. So, why would the Bible teach this dogma? Because the religions from which the Bible originates are imperial in their very nature. The purpose of these scriptures is to control people, just like any imperial structure does. The 2 easiest ways to control is through fear or comfort. This dogma uses both. Regarding fear, one is afraid to take a path that's not part of God's plan. Why? God will be angry. Also, the path might not work out or might even take a person away from God. You get the point. Regarding solace, you don't have to figure out life or take risks, because if you follow God's plan, everything should fall into place, right? Moreover, those who are most fearful, for the reasons I've mentioned, seek that security and often end up like my mom, disappointed, discouraged, and feeling rejected by the very deity in whom they placed all their hope and trust. Okay, that's the end of my story. Thank you for listening. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone you think it might help. Until next time, this is Vincent. Goodbye.